Welcome to our quick screencast on the Articles of Confederation. Remember, this is the image that I showed you guys at the beginning of class. We talked about that it's kind of a house built on a shaky foundation. The idea that our government wasn't very strong under the Articles, or at least our national government wasn't. I told you not to worry about the creepy guy in the door. Just worry about the metaphor of the house, and maybe that can help you remember what the Articles were about and why they did not work. We talked about some major issues too. But first in class I asked you to look at these 6 items and decide which would you most prefer for your government to be able to do if you were starting your own government. If you look through these 6, I asked you to identify 3. And what we talked about in class, as most of you guys identified a lot of these as being important, that effectively the Articles of Confederation, the national government, couldn't do any of these 6 things in an effective manner, which really meant that we have a weak government. All right, we talked about why, because we're breaking away from England and we were afraid of that. But because of that fear, we create such a weak government that there's some major issues. In class, we talked about these guys on the top right, which are the Barbary pirates. Right? And they lived on the northern coast of Africa, and as merchant vessels would travel through the Strait of Gibraltar and into the Mediterranean Sea, they would loot and plunder these ships, and countries like England or France or Spain would pay these pirates to leave their ships alone. And as soon as we become a free country, we are responsible for paying off these pirates. And guess what? We can't, because we have a huge national debt. We owe money to countries like France and Holland and Spain, and we even owe money to our own citizens who fought on behalf of us in the Revolutionary War, but we had no money to pay them back. And the main reason, if you look at the top, the biggest issue was that Congress could not collect taxes. They couldn't demand taxes from the states because it was such a small national government. Remember, it's a confederal power structure, so states had the most authority. So we couldn't fund military operations, we couldn't pay off our debts, and Congress was in general bankrupt. We were flat broke as a country. A second issue is that Congress couldn't regulate trade, either foreign trade or interstate trade between 2 states. So the classic example we talked about in class is that in New York, you have New York Harbor, and tons of goods are being shipped in, and Connecticut and New Jersey are using New York Harbor, but New York's charging them a very high tax amount in order to do that. And they get so angry that they plan an armed attack on New York, which is a clear indication of how powerless Congress was to either stop this taxing or regulate any type of trade. And it led to fights and bickering among the states and also between the United States and other nations. A third problem is that there was no executive branch to enforce laws. Right? Remember, our executive branch is the branch that executes our laws. It'd be as if we had speed limits, but there were no police and out patrolling them to make sure that people were driving at the right speed. Right? So that's a major issue. There's no one to enforce these laws. We also have no one to represent us as a whole, as a country. There's no leader. So then no executive branch is a big issue. We also have no court system. Right? There's no national court system, which is mainly courts we talk about have the job of interpreting laws and settling disputes. And you see the image here, it'd be as if kids were fighting and there was no parent to break up the fight. All right, classic example of this is that if you look at states that were trying to gain new land after we'd won the Revolutionary War, right? This Northwest Territory is new land that we got from Great Britain after the war. And if you look at this area right here, that I've circled, this is an area that Connecticut and Virginia are almost going to war over. They're claiming that this land belongs to them, but it's not even connected to either state. So this type of a dispute typically would be handled by some kind of judicial branch, but there wasn't one. When we talk about the Congress, which the only branch of government that did exist, there were some major flaws there. One, in regards to voting, each state had 1 vote, right? Which meant that states like Rhode Island, with not a very high population, had the same amount of power as a state like New York or Pennsylvania or Massachusetts, which had a really large population back then. And this angered the large states to some degree, and it really made the small states happy. But it made Congress very ineffective, which is the next weakness we'll talk about, is that Congress could rarely pass any laws. Today, our Capitol building, our Congress, is bicameral. You see here, you have one chamber that is the House of Representatives, and then another chamber that is the Senate. In the Articles of Confederation, Congress was unicameral. There was one chamber, and in that chamber, each state had 1 vote, as we talked about in the previous slide. And in order for a law to pass, 9 out of 13 states had to approve it, which is close to 70%. That's a very difficult number to attain, and it meant that laws were rarely passed. And although Congress didn't have much power, the powers that they had were virtually ineffective because they couldn't pass laws. Another problem, there was no real common currency that was used around the countries. Each state could print their own money. There was New York money, there was Massachusetts money, there were even states that used Canadian money. And as merchants or vendors, people that were selling things, if you were receiving money from all these different areas, it's hard to know what things are worth. For instance, if some clothing cost 10 Massachusetts shillings, well, how many New York dollars was that? And this caused confusion, and it caused our economy to fail, among other things. And then lastly, the idea of amendments or changes to the Articles of Confederation could only happen if all 13 states agreed, which was virtually impossible. Even today, if you think about it, if we could get 50 states to agree on something, that would be amazing. And getting 13 states to agree back then was tough. So it guaranteed that amendments were not going to be added and this document was not going to be changed. So when you add all these problems together, you get a government, a national government that's very weak, state governments that are very strong, that bicker with each other, and in the end, this experiment of government ultimately fails. Right at the beginning, we talked about these different characteristics that you might want your national government to be able to do, and the fact of the matter is that our national government under the Articles of Confederation couldn't do any of them. So what I expect you to know is what the Articles were, why they were written in such a weak fashion. Right, it was a reaction to a fear of the strong national government of England, but also then what problems it created. And when we get back, we'll talk about what we did to fix these problems. Thanks.